Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Self Employed, the Forgotten Community. You're very welcome to our podcast again today. Hi, Dan. How are you today?
How are you, Daniel? I
Very
am
good.
very good.
Yeah, Dan, we're gonna talk about networking today, which is a crucial part of any business, I guess, any successful business, because I honestly believe that networking done properly is survival. It's not sales. But yet, most people sort of think networking is about getting leads and selling services and pitching what you do. What do you think about that? I mean, we're both involved in networking in one way or another for the last 27 years or so. So, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. Again, I go back to everything you do really requires a skill. There's a skill in networking. Um, I remember way back in the day, I was told, no, you have to get out there, you have to go on networking, you have to, you know, go everywhere and do everything. And I did. Because I would be very driven, but I was doing what an awful lot of business owners or entrepreneurs do is just keep going without stopping and thinking. And I figured that after all my years networking, all I ended up with was a drawer full of business cards, you know, because it is true that when you're networking, everyone is there to sell and nobody's there to buy. But then I realized then BNI, where that's different. And people think BNI is networking, and this is not a plug for BNI, but I just want to explain my thoughts, give my thoughts on the difference. You know, it's about BNI is about developing relationships, you know. And I remember one incident that I was asked to speak at evening, and there was about maybe 60 people in the room. And I was facilitating. So 60 people. So I asked them all to give us 30 seconds about what they do, their name, business, and what they do, right? So we went right around the room. So then I asked them, okay, you've heard who's in the room. And I picked on the accountant. I love picking on accountants. So I said to the room, I said, okay, you've heard an accountant there, you know, would hands up the people that would recommend that accountant. Sure, all the hands went up. Of course, we'd recommend the accountant. And I said, I don't think you would, lads. Think about it. Because just because you got their name and that they're an accountant, that you'd suddenly recommend them, that you're going to put your reputation on the line. And suddenly the penny dropped with an awful lot of them. Yeah, we're just introduced. That doesn't mean we're going to recommend somebody. And people go to these events thinking, well, if I'm in the room, you're going to recommend me. Right? No, we're not. We need to build a relationship. And people ask me often, like, what's the difference between a networking event and being a member of the BNI chapter? And again, I'm not plugging BNI, but I'm trying to explain the difference between networking and referral marketing. You must build a relationship because there is nothing worse than you recommending someone that doesn't do a good job because it's back on you.
Yeah, you're spot on, Dan. It's networking is not about selling. And if everybody goes to a networking event to sell, then who's going to be there to who's going to buy? Nobody. It's about staying in because as a self-employed person, your network becomes your sounding board. It becomes your support system, your referral engine. It also becomes a great source of clarity. And I also found for myself that building those relationships built friendships, which went well beyond, people running, not staying in contact with people, and then you meet them after years and you still have that relationship. So, yeah, networking is networking done properly and networking done with intention is what works. Networking done in a random, sporadic way doesn't work at all, you know. And why it mattered for me when I became a part of BNI 27 years ago was that I had no internal sales team. I was self employed. I didn't have any sort of built in collaboration. I certainly didn't have any built in accountability. And I didn't have a feedback loop. And I had no one challenging how I was thinking. And of course, what started to happen with me was I started to overthink, delay decisions, get stuck longer, and carry the pressure alone. And then, of course, when I became a member of BNI, that changed because suddenly I was sitting in a room with 30 plus people who were invested in wanting to help me succeed and grow my business. So for me, you know, you've got to understand that networking and referral marketing is about building relationships, which leads to building trust, and that is key when it comes to any networking group, for that matter. You know.
It does, and I think there's a couple of things. There's a couple of other things as well that I found with myself. I'd be what they call an extroverted introvert. So, in other words, that yeah, I can go on stage and I can talk because I spent 40 years playing music, you know, so used to the stage, used to a microphone. But if you walk me into a room full of people that I don't know, it is by far my worst nightmare. I absolutely hated it. But you know when you have that drive in you, that people told me you need to network. This is way back in the day. So I took my biggest fear, my most hated activity, and just did it. But I didn't learn how to do it properly. And also, I found as well, then the second thing I wanted to say was the network you choose is crucial. You need to be in a room full of like minded people, you know, that because I remember I absolutely hate sales. Now, I'm self employed 45 years like you. I've always thankfully had a very good business, whatever I was doing over those 45 years, but I hated sales. I absolutely hated sales. And I remember the first morning I went to a BNI chapter and I sat there and then you know, where you bring in your positive contribution, So one guy stood up and said, I would like an introduction to a particular hotel. I had a franchise for the Wine Buff. And next thing, 3 seats down, the office supply guy said, actually, I can recommend you in there. And I goes, that's it. That is the sweet spot. That the two lads had enough trust in each other that they recommended them into the hotel. So they worked together. And I goes, that's the way I want to do business,
Okay.
because I can't sell. I hate it.
Most people will start out and they'll absolutely do networking wrong. You know, they'll attend random events. I'm sure you've been at a networking event where you have the guy running around and all he's doing is handing out business cards and talking about himself. You know, and
Yep.
that's not how networking works. And then, of course, what happens is you do that a number of times, and as you said yourself, all you end up with is a drawer full of business cards, and then you're saying, "Well, networking doesn't work, and therefore I'm not attending again." You know, I mean, really, the shift. You know, if you think about, from selling to building to going to building relationships, that's going to keep me in business. I mean, that's what networking is about. It's building those solid relationships, and it will keep you in business. You know, we've both survived God knows how many recessions, a great big bloody pandemic in the middle of it, but it was because of the network that we built. And when you do networking properly, Dan, it's consistent, not occasional. You have to show up every week. You have to stay visible. You have to build familiarity, and then trust is built in repetition. And you know as well as I do that, visibility, credibility, and profitability are really, really important aspects. And I know B and I talk an awful lot about that in terms of VCP. But, if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're not visible, it means you're not being seen. And when you are being seen, if you're not credible, you're not going to get business. So, you got to work a way to move from visibility to credibility. And once you become credible, then you can start building to the point where that visibility and credibility becomes profitable because you move through those phases. But you must work at it then, and there's a certain amount that you need to do, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a future podcast about how you move from visibility to credibility to profitability. And the other big thing, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, Dan, is your network doesn't have to be wide as long as it's deep. You don't need 100 contacts. All you need is 5 to 10 solid, deep relationships who understand your business and who are confident to refer you.
The other thing as well, I think, is that you need to go into your network with the right mindset. How can I help somebody today? And I know when I say that, if I'm speaking somewhere, half the room goes, that the eyes roll to heaven. I go, oh, for God's sake, here comes freaking Mother Teresa again, and it's not. It is, how can I help somebody? And then they will in turn help you back. Like, I got a client recently. We're 2026 now, right? I got a client recently, and I was recommended by someone I met first in 2007 in a BNI meeting. I mean, that's very rare. We have people that we met way back in the day then, and they're still recommending us. I think that's very important. But I have seen too many times people rocking up to a meeting or a network, hunting for business. And we've always seen, are you a hunter or are you a farmer? And people listen to this podcast, they go, name of Jesus, these boys are talking about hunting and farming. They got off on a tangent. Am I on the wrong podcast? What we mean is that you don't go into a network hunting for business. You go in there farming, where you culture relationships. You build relationships. Now, will you build relationships with everybody? No. But as you said earlier, there is that few that you can build a really good relationship with, and you start working together. And the concept of having one or two good referral partners can be very, very enjoyable, and can be very profitable. And you find that you're not working alone anymore. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and I mean, the name of this podcast, Dan, is Self-Employed: The Forgotten Community. And we spoke on our very first podcast, I think, about that feeling of isolation. And when you are self-employed, isolation can make you feel that you're forgotten. And the hidden benefit of networking, when it's done properly, is you've got people to talk to. You go along, you've built a relationship, and you have an opportunity to talk to that person. You have it's that peer support. You have someone that understands the pressure of being self-employed. You have someone who can challenge you. You have someone who's there to support you. When you're hitting a bit of a brick wall, all you need to do is go up and say, "Hi, Dan, listen, I'd like to bounce an idea off you because I'm struggling a little at the moment." And, getting that feedback and peer support is so, so important. But as you say, Dan, you're so right when you say that you have to pick the right network, because, the right room can change your direction, not just your pipeline.
Yeah. I have seen that I have gone to networks and they just weren't my people, you know. And the other thing I notice as well is that if you have a room full of people that meet every week, they all show up every week, they will always be good people to refer to one of your clients or one of your friends because their mindset is right. They always want to do a good job. You will find the best plumber inside in a network where most plumbers are, I'm just talking about trades in general. We just pick on the plumbers. Most plumbers are just thinking about the underfloor heating they have to put down this morning, right? But the good ones, they're working on their business. They're at their meeting at 7 a.m. in the morning and harvesting and helping people and hopefully getting business from the network. And then they go and put on the underfloor heating. You'll find their mindset is right. And also, I find some people, actually a lot of people, you'd find them in these referral marketing situations for years and years. That means that they're really, really good at what they do. Because if you're not getting referrals, yeah, you can go in with the right mindset and you say, okay, how can I help people here? But at the end of the day, if you don't get business out of it, you're gone, right?
Yeah.
And like, you'd only get referred once. You'd only get referred once. You gain the trust after that.
Yeah, I mean, I became a member of BNI in 1999, and it was to grow my business. Yeah, that was the sole function of becoming a member of BNI. 27 years later, I'm still in BNI, but I stayed not just to grow my business, but for the support, for the friends. Someone said to me once, that people will only do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. Now, you could take the like out of that if, and they may still do business with you, but if they don't trust you, by God, they won't. And just a quick story on how that trust works. I remember we were actually looking to get fitted wardrobes built in our house, and my wife kept me to say, "Listen, Dan, would you ever organise get fitted wardrobes done in the bedroom?" And I said, "There's no one in BNI, when someone that comes into BNI that I trust, I'll get it done." And there was a guy who became a member of a chapter in Killarney, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Gavin, yeah, and
Yeah.
I asked him, and he came up. I was able to give the key of my house, and he came up every morning from Killarney. He left himself in with his team. They left the house every evening the way they got it that morning, spick and span, and they spent a week there building an unbelievable suite of wardrobes in the bedroom. I mean, it was unbelievable. And that's what trust is. But it's both ways. He trusted me to allow him to do the job, and I trusted him to do the job properly. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I have to say, when there's trust involved, business is easier.
And I think it is very important as well to, for people that are listening to this podcast, we're not here promoting BNI, but what we're doing is we're trying to explain the difference between sporadic networking, the opening of an envelope somewhere, so you go there, you need to be networking, versus referral marketing, which is a completely different thing. And people get the waters muddied. They think that, okay, turning up to a breakfast meeting every Tuesday morning, right, is networking. No, that's referral generation. That's where you build trust and relationships and you work with each other to build each other's business. Because, for instance, I've seen loads of times that people's business can be seasonal. So there's a big activity that might be looking at the Christmas market. So everyone then, the 20, 30 people in the room know that, okay, let's focus for our member here for the Christmas market. That doesn't happen with unorganized, sporadic type of networking where you just turn up and you're just meeting new people all the time. And we will get an opportunity, I think, Dan, because you mentioned it earlier about the difference between the different relationships we can have: visible, credible, and profitable. And what exactly do they mean? There's where some of the skills of winning good business through referral marketing comes in. So we'll probably do that in another podcast and
Absolutely.
explain the difference,
Yeah, and that, yeah, Dan, and it's hard to believe that we're after coming to the end of another podcast. And again, just to remind everyone that's listening, networking done properly isn't about selling more. It's about struggling less, and it's about thinking clearer. Build trust, build relationships, and build a very, very strong core group of people that want to help you, that are invested in you succeeding. So until next week, Dan, we'll talk to you again.
Bye.